If you're buying property in Brazil for rental income, here's the truth. About 95% of what's on the market is a bad investment. Only 5% actually delivers the yield you're looking for. Let me show you how to spot it and exactly how to calculate the real return before you commit a single dollar. I'm Lorenzo Tusini, the founder of Grow Abroad Consulting. We work with international investors who want to enter the Brazilian real estate market successfully. We are your personal shopper for Brazilian property, and we understand your specific profile, set up the right strategy, identify the property that fits your goals, and support you end-to-end together with our licensed local partners on the ground in Brazil. We work with a partner here in Brazil who has been investing in real estate for over 15 years. Traditional rentals, Airbnb, auctions, land, and even development. But his core asset class is apartments for rental income, and his thesis is one I've adopted completely for the international investors we work with. Many foreigners arrive thinking the same thing. They think Brazilian real estate, being in a booming market, just performs, and whatever you buy, the high yields will take care of themselves. That is false, and it's the most expensive misunderstanding a foreign investor can have about this market. So here's the key point. The vast majority of properties in Brazil were never designed to be rented. They were designed to be lived in. Their final buyer was always meant to be a family, not an investor. So when you run the numbers on these properties for rental income, the math simply does not work. Only about 5% of the properties on the market have the characteristics that make a rental investment actually attractive. And what makes that 5% different? 4 things. First, high yield. A strong rental return relative to the total investment. Second, constant appreciation. And third, constant demand. There's always a pool of tenants who want it. And fourth, low vacancy. Miss any one of these and you haven't bought yourself an investment. You've bought a place to live. So let's get practical. How do you actually know whether a property belongs to the 5% or the 95%? You run the numbers. Your numbers, not the developer's projections. Here's the formula. Start with the negotiated purchase price and then add 2 layers of costs on top. First, the transaction costs in Brazil. Every purchase involves the ITBI, the property transfer tax, plus notary and registration fees. The ITBI rate depends on the city. So, for example, São Paulo, capital city, charges 3%, and other cities run between 2 and 2.5%. Add also the registration notary fees, and as a conservative benchmark for a foreign buyer, budget around 5% of the purchase price as total transaction costs. Now, one practical difference versus buying in Spain or in Portugal, in those markets where the developer delivers your unit, when the developer delivers your unit, the property transfer tax is due immediately at delivery. No flexibility. While in Brazil, the trigger for the ITBI and formal registration is not possession, it's the actual title transfer at the registry, which means that after the building delivers, you can take possession, furnish the unit, start renting it out while the formal registration and its costs come later. In practice, some investors, they even delay the registration by several months or years, generating early rental income before the transaction costs are due. That's a real cash flow advantage, but it's entirely at your own risk. So until the title is formally registered in your name, you hold possession but not legal ownership. If the developer were to face insolvency in that window, the unit could be at risk. We always recommend formalizing registration as soon as practically possible after delivery. Second cost layer, setup. In Brazil, you take possession of bare walls, usually no flooring, no kitchen, no appliances, no furniture. To rent at a premium, you need to deliver a finished decorated unit. Budget this carefully. Add all the 3 components together, purchase price, transaction costs, setup costs, and that's your total investment. That's the number you divide into to get your real yield, not the purchase price, the total. Now estimate your annual rental income, and here short-term and long-term rental work very differently. So let's separate them. For a long-term rental, the good news for a foreign investor is that in Brazil the tenant typically pays the condominium fees, the IPTU, the annual property tax that we discussed before, and the utilities. So your rental income is much closer to pure income that it would be in Europe, for instance. To benchmark what a unit like yours would actually rent for in the long term, you need close transaction data. So what I mean, real deals that close in the last few months in the same building or area. There's a free platform in Brazil that gives you exactly that, and I did a full walkthrough on how to use it in a dedicated video. You can find it in the card on the other side of the screen. So for short-term rentals on Airbnb, you need two numbers before you can calculate anything: your average expected daily rate for that unit in that location and your expected occupancy rate. Both depend heavily on the specific building, the neighborhood, and the format of the unit. Then you subtract the operating costs, the cleaning, the HOA fees, the IPTU, the maintenance to arrive at net income. Estimating those inputs accurately requires professional market data and local operational knowledge. This analysis is part of what we include in our consulting package, of course, using professional tools to give you a realistic projections before you commit. And here's something that surprises most people. Short-term rental does not automatically beat long-term in Brazil. It depends entirely on the location, on the building, and on the unit type. Some neighborhoods see Airbnb dramatically outperform a long-term tenancy. Others do not. The occupancy and daily rate simply do not justify the operational overhead in every case, and a long-term contract wins cleanly sometimes. Every single case needs its own analysis. Divide your annual net income by your total investment, and that's your real yield. Below 7%, look elsewhere. Above 9 to 10 or even higher, you're in the right territory. Beyond the numbers, there are physical characteristics that separate the 5% from the 95%. First, unit size and layout. Compact units, typically between 20 and 45 square meters, consistently outperform larger units like 3-bedroom apartments, for instance, on yield. Not because smaller is always better, but because you're paying per square meter, and more square meters do not automatically mean more rent. A 25 to 30 square meter unit with a genuinely separate bedroom, not a rectangular studio, but a layout that separates sleeping from living, is rarer than it sounds and significantly easier to rent at a premium. For example, 2 bedrooms intelligently packed into 40 square meters outperform a badly designed 60 square meter unit on yield almost every time. The rule is simple: you're buying yield per square meter, not square meters. Second, walkability. The most reliable driver of rental demand in Brazilian cities is lifestyle accessibility on foot. Can a tenant walk to a restaurant, walk to a metro, supermarket, or a gym or a pharmacy without a car, without an Uber, of course, just walking out of the front door? In São Paulo, proximity to metro stations is the single most reliable predictor of rental demand. In coastal cities, for example, is the combination of beach access and urban services. Third, building amenities. Brazil doesn't have the energy class obsession you can see in Europe. I mean, they're getting crazy about it. What it has is a constant upgrade cycle in new developments, and tenants will notice. At a minimum, look for a pool, for a gym, and ideally a co-working space. A well-amenitized building rents faster, retains tenants longer, and commands a premium over a bare-bones building in the same location. Put these 3 filters together: optimize compact layout, walkable location, and solid amenity package, and you've already narrowed your universe to something close to the right 5%. Then you run the yield calculation to confirm. Now let's talk about the numbers, because this is where most comparisons online get it completely wrong. A lot of Brazilian videos compare properties that yield 5 or 6% a year against fixed income, which is called renda fixa in Brazil, which is low risk and frankly pays very well, or against the stock market, and they conclude real estate is not worth it. And on those properties, they are right. A 5 or 6% yield is not a good real estate investment, but that's the return on the wrong 95% of properties. It's not the return on the right 5%. When you buy from the right 5%, you're not looking at a 6 or 5% rate, a return rate. You're looking at 8, 9, 10, 11, sometimes more than 12% a year. And that's before appreciation. That's the real difference. A well-chosen property gives you that yield plus a hard asset that tends to appreciate over time. Something that fixed income simply cannot do. That's the gap between real estate doesn't make sense and real estate is among the best performing assets in my portfolio. It was never about the country, it's about the selection. And here's the structural reason this matters for the next decade. The most important point I would say in this video, I believe that the rental market in Brazil is going to grow significantly over the coming decades. The pool of people looking for rental housing is expanding, not shrinking. According to Brazil's official statistics agency, the IBGE, around 21% of the population lives in rented housing. In some capitals, that passes 30%. Think about São Paulo, for example. 30% of a population, roughly 12 million people, just in the city, not even counting the metropolitan area. That's millions of people actively looking for rental properties every year, and that number is climbing. But you cannot just buy any property and ride a wave. You should buy the specific kind of property that this enormous growing demographic actually wants to rent. Well located, well finished inside that 5%. Get that right, and you have constant demand, low vacancy, and returns that beat almost anything you'd find in Europe at the same price point. Is Brazilian real estate a good investment? The real question is, do you know how to find the 5% that it is? That takes real market data, local knowledge, yield analysis, location scoring, and understanding of the rental demand neighborhood by neighborhood. For a foreign investor who doesn't live in Brazil, that doesn't speak the language and doesn't have the local data, telling the 5% from the 95% alone is almost impossible. That's exactly the gap we close. If you're thinking about investing in Brazil, the link in the description is where we start the conversation. I'll see you in the next one.